Hey everyone, my name's Kyle 35, and I've been married to Emma 32 for about 7 years now. We met when I was 25 and she was this beautiful, smart, driven woman who seemed to have everything together. We clicked instantly. Things moved fast, we got married, and honestly, it felt like life couldn't get any better. We both had decent jobs. Emma worked in marketing, and I owned a small construction business. I trusted her. I never once doubted anything about our relationship. I guess when you're in love, you don't see the cracks, right? The first sign of trouble, though, came when she started changing her routine, which was odd because Emma was a creature of habit. She'd always been home by 6 p.m. after work, but then suddenly, she had these work dinners and late meetings. I told myself she was just busy, climbing the corporate ladder and all that. I wanted to support her ambitions. But then I noticed something else. Emma started dressing up a lot more, spending extra time on her appearance. Not just for these work events, but even on her days off. At first, I thought, good for her, she's feeling confident. But deep down, something just felt off. That's where this all starts. I didn't know it at the time, but I was already living with a woman who had perfected the art of lying. But more on that later. After the late nights started becoming a regular thing, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. Something wasn't right, but I didn't want to seem like the paranoid husband, I mean, who wants to be that guy, questioning his wife's every move? So, I told myself to relax. People get busy, schedules change. But, man, hindsight is 20/20, and I wish I had trusted my gut sooner. One of the weirdest changes came in the mornings. Emma always used to love our quiet mornings together, sipping coffee before work. It was kind of our thing. But lately, she started rushing out the door, almost as if she couldn't wait to get out of the house. No more morning conversations, no more sharing little moments. Just her grabbing her stuff and bolting. Then there was her phone. She started being really protective over it. I mean, in all our years together, her phone would be lying around, and we'd share playlists, pictures, whatever. Suddenly, she wouldn't let it out of her sight. I remember one time it buzzed, and I reached over just to pass it to her. She snatched it so quickly that I was kind of taken aback. She laughed it off, saying it was just work stuff, but I couldn't ignore the way my stomach dropped. Still, I didn't push it. I wanted to believe her. Around this time, she started talking about this new coffee shop she'd found. It was her spot, she said. She went there every day for her iced latte. I never thought much of it because, why would I? But now, looking back, I think it was another crack I missed. This coffee shop was where she met him. Yeah, him, the barista. But I didn't know that yet. We were still playing house. She was still coming home, smiling, and acting like everything was normal. We were even planning a weekend getaway at that point. And every time she looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me, I believed her. Hell, I wanted to believe her. It was around then that my best friend, Jake, started asking questions too. He was over for a beer one night and casually asked if Emma was okay. He noticed she seemed distant, distracted even when she was around. I brushed it off, told him she was just stressed with work, but deep down, I think that was the first time I admitted to myself that something wasn't adding up. This was just the beginning of a much bigger betrayal. But I wouldn't find that out until later. As the weeks went by, those uneasy feelings turned into full-blown suspicion. It was like everything Emma did started raising more red flags. She would disappear for hours at a time on weekends, saying she was out shopping or running errands. But when she came back, there were no bags, no signs that she had actually been anywhere. I'd ask her about it, and she'd casually throw out vague answers like, "Oh, I didn't find anything I liked," or, "I ended up meeting a friend for lunch." Every time, she had an explanation. But the cracks were showing. One night, I was out with Jake, grabbing a drink after work. We were talking about random stuff, but then Jake dropped a bomb on me. He said, "Man, I don't want to cause any trouble, but I saw Emma last week when I was downtown. She didn't see me, but she wasn't alone. She was with some guy. They looked close." I remember just staring at him for a moment, my brain trying to process what he was saying. My heart was pounding, but I played it off like it was no big deal. "Are you sure it was her?" I asked, even though I knew it had to be. Jake wouldn't make something like that up. He's my best friend, always looking out for me. "Yeah, man." I didn't want to say anything until now because I wasn't sure what was going on. But they were walking together, kind of arm in arm. I didn't think too much of it at first, but, well, it didn't look like just a friendly hangout. I laughed it off, told him he was probably just seeing things. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. Emma wouldn't do that. But Jake's words stuck with me. They played on a loop in my head for days. I couldn't shake the image of her with someone else. That's when I started paying more attention to the details. One night, Emma was getting ready to head out again, claiming she had some late-night meeting with a client. I casually asked, "Where's the meeting? Maybe I'll pick you up after." She hesitated for just a second before rattling off some fancy restaurant name I'd never heard her mention before. That hesitation, man, it felt like a punch to the gut. Something was definitely going on. That night, I didn't confront her. Instead, I waited until she left, and then I did something I never thought I'd do, I followed her. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but I had to know. I couldn't sit there anymore, drowning in suspicion. So I got in my truck, and I followed her car at a distance. Sure enough, she wasn't heading to any restaurant. Instead, she pulled into a small parking lot, behind the coffee shop she loved so much. The one she'd been talking about non-stop. And there he was, the barista. They got out of their cars and met right in the middle, arms around each other. I felt my stomach drop as I watched her kiss him. My wife. Kissing some random guy in a parking lot like I didn't exist. I didn't confront them right then. I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, my mind racing, my heart shattered. When she got home later that night, she acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she was tired, and headed to bed. That was the moment I realized, Emma was a pro at this. A pro at living a double life. She looked me in the eye, told me she loved me, and went to sleep next to me like nothing had happened. I didn't know how deep it went yet. I had no idea that this barista wasn't the only one. I spent that entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene of Emma with that guy, the barista. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how long this had been going on and why I hadn't seen it sooner. I had so many questions, but I was also afraid of the answers. The worst part? Emma was lying right next to me, peacefully asleep, like nothing was wrong. I felt like a stranger in my own life. The next morning, I tried to keep it together. I acted like everything was normal, but inside, I was torn apart. I didn't know what my next move should be. Should I confront her? Should I wait to gather more proof? It was like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare, but I wasn't ready to wake up just yet. I needed to know why. I needed to know how far it had gone. So, I started paying attention, really paying attention. Every little thing she said, every movement she made, I watched. I noticed she was texting more often than usual, always making sure her phone was face down on the table when we were together. She'd smile at something on the screen, then glance at me like she was checking if I'd noticed. I didn't let on that I had. There was one night in particular that really hit me. We were sitting on the couch, watching TV, when her phone buzzed. She grabbed it so fast, it was like she was afraid I'd catch a glimpse. I casually asked, "Who's that?" and she gave me this weird smile, like she thought I was joking. "Oh, it's just Rachel from work," she said, her voice a little too casual. "We're planning a team event next week." I nodded, trying not to let my face show what I was feeling. But in that moment, I knew she was lying. There was no team event. Rachel was just the excuse she used when she needed to cover her tracks. I didn't push it, though. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not without more evidence. Over the next few days, Emma kept up the charade. She'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings, tell me she loved me, and head off to work. But I knew she wasn't always at the office. Some days, I'd check her location, something we had always shared just for safety, and she wasn't where she said she'd be. She was at the coffee shop, probably with him. I started doing my own digging. I checked our bank statements, looking for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I noticed it: small, frequent charges at different restaurants and hotels. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was business lunches or client meetings. But the times didn't add up. They were all during the day, when she was supposedly at work. Then, one afternoon, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, constantly wondering. I needed answers. I called her office, just to surprise her and ask if she wanted to grab lunch. Her assistant answered, and when I asked if Emma was available, there was a long pause. Emma's not here today," she said, sounding confused. "She took the day off." I felt the ground drop out from under me. She had never mentioned anything about taking the day off. I thanked the assistant, hung up, and stared at my phone for a long time, just processing what I'd heard. Emma was lying to me. Every day, she was lying straight to my face, and now I knew it for sure. That night, when she came home, she was all smiles again. I could barely look at her. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her. But it had to be the right time. I couldn't just walk up to her and demand the truth. She was too good at lying, too slick with her stories. If I wanted real answers, I had to catch her in the act. And that's when I decided to set a trap. By the time I decided to set the trap, I was already emotionally drained. It was like living in a constant fog, knowing my wife was lying to me every day but still not having all the answers. I needed closure, I needed her lies to come to light, and I needed to be able to confront her in a way that left her no room to wiggle out of it. So, here's what I did: I took the next day off work without telling Emma. I told her I had an important job lined up that would keep me busy all day. She didn't question it, why would she? I'd been nothing but trustworthy for the entire length of our marriage. Little did she know, I wasn't going to work at all. That morning, she kissed me goodbye, just like she always did, and left the house. I watched her drive away and waited for about 15 minutes before I followed. My heart was pounding the entire time. I'd never done anything like this before. I didn't even recognize the person I'd become, but I couldn't stand living with these doubts anymore. I followed her to, surprise, the coffee shop. Her routine had become so predictable that I could have guessed it with my eyes closed. She walked inside, and I parked my car a few blocks away, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. After about 30 minutes, she walked out with him. The barista. I watched them laugh together, completely oblivious to the fact that I was sitting just a stone's throw away, watching my entire life fall apart. They got into separate cars, and this is where things got interesting. I expected them to head to his place, or maybe a hotel, but instead, they drove back to our house. Yeah, you heard that right. The house I'd been working my ass off to pay for, the home we built together, was the place she was bringing him. I followed them at a distance, trying to keep my rage in check. By the time they pulled into our driveway, I could barely breathe. They were too busy laughing, too wrapped up in each other to notice me pull up a few houses down. I watched them walk inside, and every second felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I waited. I didn't rush in. I wanted to make sure I'd catch them red-handed. After about 10 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to the front door, my heart pounding in my ears. I opened the door as quietly as I could and stepped inside. The sounds coming from the bedroom hit me like a freight train. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my hand gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could hear their voices, her voice, the same voice that used to tell me she loved me, and I knew. I knew what was happening behind that door. I kicked it open. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment, but all I felt was numb. There they were, my wife and the barista, in our bed. Our bed. They froze, eyes wide, like deer caught in headlights. Emma scrambled to cover herself with the sheets, her face pale as if she couldn't believe what was happening. The barista? He looked more confused than anything, like he hadn't thought he'd ever get caught. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I just stood there, staring at them, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. "Get out," I said, my voice calm but shaking with rage. "Both of you." The guy was out of the bed in an instant, grabbing his clothes, not saying a word. I didn't care about him. He was just a symptom of a much bigger disease, Emma's betrayal. He left so fast, I barely had time to register him before he was gone. That's when Emma broke down. She started crying, apologizing, telling me she could explain. But I didn't want her explanations. I didn't want to hear her lies anymore. I just stood there, watching her scramble to make sense of what had just happened, her words sounding emptier than ever. "You don't have to explain anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen enough." I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her sobbing on the bed, and went downstairs. I needed air. I needed to get out of that house. I could still hear her crying, calling after me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Not after what I'd just seen. But I wasn't done. There was more to this story, more than I ever imagined. I drove around aimlessly after leaving the house, my mind a complete mess. Everything felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. I kept replaying the scene in my head, Emma with the barista, in our bed, like it was no big deal. I thought I had hit rock bottom, but I had no idea how much further I had to fall. After driving around for a while, I pulled into a parking lot and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the signs had been there for months, maybe longer. I didn't know how long it had been going on with the barista, but I was sure this wasn't her first affair. Emma was too good at hiding things, too comfortable with lying. There had to be more. I thought about all the times she'd been out late, all the work events and client meetings that never seemed to add up. And those small, unexplained charges on our credit card, restaurants, hotels, places I'd never been. My mind started connecting the dots, and a sick feeling settled in my gut. I couldn't let it go. I had to know how deep the betrayal went. So, I made a decision. I was going to dig deeper, find out everything. If Emma had been cheating on me with more than just the barista, I needed to know. I wasn't about to let her lie her way out of this. When I got back to the house later that evening, Emma was sitting on the couch, looking like a complete wreck. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face streaked with tears. She started to speak as soon as I walked in, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear it right now," I said, my voice steady. "We'll talk later. I'm not ready to deal with your excuses." She nodded, silent for once, and I headed upstairs. I needed space to think, to figure out what my next move was. But I couldn't stop myself from snooping. I went straight to her phone. Emma always used to leave it lying around, but lately, she'd been keeping it close. Tonight, though, she was too distracted to remember, and it was sitting on the nightstand. I unlocked it and started scrolling through her messages. Nothing. All her conversations were wiped clean, but I wasn't surprised. Emma was smart, she knew how to cover her tracks. But she wasn't that smart. I checked her email next, digging through her old work correspondence. That's when I found it, a series of emails between Emma and a guy named Mark. They weren't recent, but they painted a very clear picture. The dates lined up with a work trip she'd taken a year ago, one she told me was strictly business. Turns out, Mark was a client, but their emails were anything but professional. I felt my chest tighten as I read through the messages. They had been meeting up for months, sneaking around whenever she traveled for work. It was like finding out she'd been living a double life. The barista wasn't even the start of it. I was furious, my hands shaking as I pieced it all together. Emma had been cheating on me for years, first with Mark, then with the barista, and who knows how many others in between. All this time, I'd been the fool, working hard to build a life for us while she was out sleeping with other men. I confronted her later that night. I showed her the emails, throwing the phone on the table in front of her. She looked at me with wide, guilty eyes, but I wasn't interested in hearing her lies anymore. How long? I demanded. How long have you been doing this? She broke down again, but this time, I wasn't moved by her tears. I was too far gone, too hurt. She admitted that it wasn't just the barista. There had been others, Mark, a few more flings over the years. She swore they didn't mean anything, that she still loved me, but I couldn't believe a word out of her mouth. I kicked her out that night. I couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. As she packed her things, she kept pleading with me to forgive her, to give her another chance, but I was done. There was no going back after everything I had uncovered. But that wasn't the last of it. Not by a long shot. After kicking Emma out, I thought I had finally hit the lowest point. I thought the worst was behind me, that I had uncovered everything. But I was wrong. I had no idea just how deep Emma's betrayals went, or how much darker this story would get. About a week after she left, I was cleaning up around the house, trying to move on, trying to piece together the life I thought I had. That's when I found it. A small, inconspicuous envelope tucked away in her nightstand, hidden under some old receipts and random papers. It had no name on it, no return address, just my house, our house, listed as the destination. I opened it, and my heart nearly stopped. Inside was a printed letter, signed by none other than the barista, and it wasn't just some love note. It was a full-on confession. A detailed account of how long Emma had been cheating on me, not just with him, but with several men over the course of our marriage. He wasn't just her latest affair, he had been one of many. The letter explained how they would meet during the day, while I was at work, in my own house. He even mentioned the exact times when Emma would text him, waiting for me to leave so they could sneak around. But the most gut-wrenching part? It wasn't just physical. Emma had spun elaborate lies to these men, telling them that our marriage was over, that we were just roommates at this point. She painted me as this cold, distant husband who didn't care about her, who was too focused on his work to notice her slipping away. She had been playing the victim all along, crafting this narrative where she was the one who needed comfort and attention, when in reality, she was living a double life. It got worse. The letter mentioned how Emma had been planning to leave me for good but wanted to milk our life for all it was worth before she made her move. The vacation we had planned? That wasn't for us to reconnect like she'd told me. She was planning to use it as one last hurrah before breaking things off and starting a new life with someone else. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. I'd given her my trust, my love, my everything, and she had torn it apart piece by piece. And for what? Some thrill? A chance to play the victim in her own twisted story? I sat there, staring at the letter for what felt like hours, trying to process what I had just read. The betrayal was far deeper than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about sex, it was about manipulation, lies, and deception on a level I couldn't comprehend. Emma had become a stranger to me, someone I didn't recognize. I knew what I had to do. It was time to cut her out of my life completely. I called my lawyer the next morning and handed him everything, her texts, the emails, and now, this letter. I wanted her out of my life, out of my home, out of everything. No more chances, no more excuses. I was done being the fool in her sick game. But Emma wasn't going down without a fight. She started showing up at the house, begging to talk, to explain. She even had the nerve to say that the barista was lying in the letter, that he had written it out of spite because she had ended things with him. I didn't believe a word of it. I told her to leave, that I never wanted to see her again. But she wouldn't go quietly. After reading that letter, I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. I had no more room left for hurt or anger. All I wanted was to move on and never see Emma again. But, of course, nothing with her was ever that simple. She wasn't the type to just disappear quietly from my life. A few days after I had handed everything over to my lawyer, Emma showed up at the house again. This time, she wasn't crying or begging like before. She came in calm, almost cold, like she had spent time rehearsing what she was going to say. "Kyle," she started, standing in the doorway. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter, not even bothering to ask her in. "There's nothing left to say, Emma. It's over. You made sure of that." She didn't flinch. "You're being unfair. You only know half the story, and I." "No," I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know everything. I know about Mark. I know about the barista. Hell, I know about more men than I can count. Don't stand there and act like you're the victim in this." But Emma wasn't backing down. She stepped inside, ignoring the fact that I hadn't invited her. There was something in her eyes, something calculating, like she was planning her next move. "You don't understand what you're throwing away, Kyle. We can fix this." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Fix this? You really think we can just sweep this under the rug and go back to normal?" Her expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a side of her that I'd always suspected was there but had never fully witnessed: cold, manipulative. "You're going to regret this, Kyle. You think you've got it all figured out, but you don't." I stood my ground. "No, Emma, you are the one who doesn't get it. I'm done. This is over. I've already filed the papers." That's when her whole demeanor shifted. She walked right up to me, her voice low and filled with venom. "Do you really think it's going to be that easy? You want to cut me out of your life like I'm nothing? After everything? I know things, Kyle. Things that could make your life a living hell." I felt my pulse quicken. "What the hell are you talking about?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you try to take everything from me, I'll take you down with me. You don't want this to get ugly." My mind was spinning. Was she threatening me? I had never imagined Emma could go this far, but there she was, trying to manipulate me one last time, trying to scare me into backing down. "You can't scare me, Emma," I said, even though my heart was racing. "You lost that power the minute you decided to sleep with half the city. If you want to drag this out, fine. My lawyer is ready. But don't think for a second I'm going to back down." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowed, and then she turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my mind reeling from the confrontation. Emma wasn't going to go away quietly, and that much was clear. She was gearing up for a fight. The next few days were tense. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Emma to make good on her threat. And then it came. One morning, I got a call from my lawyer. Emma had decided to contest the divorce, demanding a massive settlement. She claimed that she had been neglected and emotionally abused during our marriage and was entitled to more than her fair share of our assets. It was a complete lie, but it didn't matter. She was playing dirty, trying to drag me through the mud. I couldn't believe it. After everything she had done, she was now trying to pin the blame on me, twisting the story to make herself look like the victim. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about control. Emma wanted to keep her claws in my life, to make sure I never moved on without her shadow looming over me. But I wasn't going to let her win. I knew Emma was manipulative, but I wasn't prepared for just how far she would go. Her decision to contest the divorce and play the victim completely blindsided me. I mean, after everything she had done, after all the lies and betrayals, I was somehow the bad guy. She didn't waste any time twisting the narrative. Within days, I started hearing from mutual friends, people we both knew, people who had no idea what was really going on. Emma was spreading stories, painting me as some cold, distant husband who had driven her into the arms of other men. She told anyone who would listen that I'd neglected her emotionally, that I was obsessed with work, and that she had made a mistake because she felt unloved at home. I couldn't believe it. The woman who had cheated on me with multiple men, right under my nose, was now turning me into the villain. But the worst part? Some people actually believed her. I started getting these concerned texts from friends, asking if I was okay, telling me that relationships are complicated, and that maybe I should hear Emma out. They didn't know the half of it. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her rewrite history. I called my lawyer and told him everything, the threats, the manipulation, the lies. He assured me that the evidence I had, texts, emails, the barista's letter, would work in my favor. But he also warned me that divorces like this, especially when contested, could get nasty. Emma was clearly digging her heels in for a fight. The legal battle started almost immediately. Emma's lawyer filed a motion to freeze our accounts, claiming that she needed financial support while we sorted through the divorce. Never mind the fact that she was the one who had emptied our savings on her little affairs and God knows what else. It was like she was trying to make my life as difficult as possible, dragging me through every loophole and legal technicality just to keep herself in control. It felt like a nightmare. Every day was something new, another letter from her lawyer, another set of accusations thrown my way. Emma wasn't just contesting the divorce, she was trying to squeeze every last dime out of me, claiming emotional damages, loss of income, and even alimony. Alimony. After everything she had done, she had the nerve to demand I support her. My lawyer and I worked around the clock, gathering evidence, preparing for court. But it wasn't just the legal battle that was wearing me down, it was the constant pressure, the feeling that Emma was still in my life, still pulling strings, still trying to control me even from a distance. Then, one day, I got a call from Jake. He was furious. Turns out, Emma had contacted him too, trying to get him on her side. She spun him the same sob story about being neglected and emotionally abused, hoping he'd back her up in court. But Jake wasn't buying it. "She's gone too far, man," he said, his voice tight with anger. "She's trying to turn this into a circus. You need to shut this down before she ruins everything." I agreed, but I didn't know how. I felt like I was drowning in her lies, constantly playing defense while she kept coming up with new ways to drag me through the mud. That's when Jake said something that stuck with me. "You've got the truth on your side, Kyle. Don't let her twist it. You have to get ahead of her." And he was right. I had spent too much time reacting, letting Emma dictate the terms. It was time to go on the offensive. I told my lawyer to hit her with everything we had, the emails, the barista's letter, the bank statements showing how much money she had drained from our accounts. I wasn't going to let her get away with this without facing the consequences of her actions. A few weeks later, we were in court. Emma came in, looking calm and collected, like she had nothing to hide. But as soon as the evidence started coming out, the explicit messages, the emails detailing her affairs, her facade began to crack. Her lawyer tried to object, tried to spin it as if Emma had made mistakes because of our failing marriage, but the judge wasn't buying it. By the end of the hearing, Emma's narrative had crumbled. The court saw through her lies, and it became clear that the real victim here wasn't Emma, it was me. But it wasn't over yet. Emma wasn't the type to walk away without a final blow, and I knew she still had something up her sleeve. And trust me, what she did next left me speechless. I thought the court hearing would be the final chapter, that after everything had come to light, Emma would finally accept defeat. The evidence was stacked against her, her affairs, the lies, the money she had drained from our accounts. The judge had seen right through her, and it felt like I was finally gaining control of my life again. But I should have known better. Emma wasn't the type to bow out gracefully. A few days after the court ruling, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. It was from Emma. For a split second, I thought about just tossing it without even opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open, expecting another round of manipulations or some new legal demand. But it was something worse. So much worse. Inside was a handwritten letter, but this one wasn't begging for forgiveness or trying to twist the narrative in her favor. This letter was a threat. A detailed, specific threat to ruin my life in ways I hadn't even considered. Emma knew I had come out on top in court, and she was done playing by the rules. She was ready to go nuclear. "If you think this is over," the letter began, "you don't know me as well as you think. You may have won in court, but I'm not going to disappear quietly. You can take away my money, my reputation, but you won't take everything from me without consequences. I know things about you, Kyle. Things that could destroy you." I sat down, the weight of her words sinking in. What was she talking about? What things did she think she had on me? I wasn't the one who had been lying and cheating for years. I wasn't the one with anything to hide. But Emma had always been 2 steps ahead when it came to manipulation, and I had learned by now not to underestimate her. As I read on, it became clear that Emma was ready to go beyond the legal system. She wrote about how she could ruin my business, how she could spread lies that would make me look like the villain in ways that went far beyond our mutual friends. She threatened to contact clients, suppliers, anyone I worked with, and let them know what kind of man I supposedly was. She even hinted that she would make claims of abuse, completely false accusations, of course, but ones that could still destroy my reputation and everything I had built. My blood ran cold. She wasn't going to fight fair. She was going to fight dirty, drag me through the mud in any way she could. Emma wasn't just angry about losing in court, she was furious that she had lost control of me, of the situation. This letter was her way of saying, "If I can't have what I want, I'll burn it all down." I was livid. I had given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, years of my life, and this was how she planned to end things. By trying to tear apart the one thing I had left. My career, my livelihood. That's when I realized something. Emma's threats, as terrifying as they were coming from a place of desperation. She had nothing left. The affairs, the lies, they had all come to light, and she knew she couldn't beat me in court. So she was resorting to the only weapon she had left, fear. She was trying to scare me into backing down, into making concessions in the divorce, maybe even paying her off just to make her disappear. But I wasn't going to back down. Not after everything she had put me through. I took the letter to my lawyer the next day. He read through it and sighed, shaking his head. "This is just another attempt to manipulate you," he said. "She's trying to rattle you, hoping you'll fold. But legally, she's got nothing. The court already saw through her lies." "But what about my business?" I asked, the worry creeping back in. What if she follows through on this? What if she starts spreading these lies? He looked at me, his expression serious. "We can prepare for that, Kyle. We can send a cease and desist letter to make it clear that if she spreads false information, she'll be facing a defamation suit. And if she does try to make those claims of abuse, you have plenty of evidence to prove otherwise. She's just bluffing." That gave me some relief, but not much. I knew Emma better than anyone. She was vengeful, and when she set her mind to something, she didn't stop. She was the type to go down swinging, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, I waited, tense and on edge, expecting her to make her move. But nothing happened. No phone calls from clients, no rumors circulating about me, nothing. It was as if Emma had vanished. I started to think maybe she had finally accepted that she couldn't win, that she had nothing left to fight with. Maybe, after everything, she was done. But then, a few weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to open it. And when I did, my heart sank. It was a photo of Emma, with another man, but this time, it wasn't just some random affair. The photo showed them together in my house. The house I had worked so hard for. She was flaunting her new relationship in front of me, rubbing it in my face that she had already moved on, already found someone else to manipulate. And it wasn't just about the relationship, this was her way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still in control. Emma wasn't done with me yet.